Hello everybody! Today we're doing something many people requested. We're looking at the YouTube channel called WhatIfAltHist. My initial reaction was that you can't debunk alternative history, it's all made up, that's the point. And while WhatIfAltHist gained most of their subscribers from old What If videos, they have recently switched to trying to predict the future and explaining the social issues of today. I watched a whole bunch of their videos to be prepared for this, and to me it seems their education is in history. I also linked the videos I watched in the description. A historical education is fine if you make videos explaining past events, but if you want to really analyze the political present, you can't just do that by looking at history. You need to actually examine the present, and that's not a job for historians, but a job for people who studied sociology or political science, like me. Full disclosure, I'm a leftist. I don't think capitalism works on a global stage in our modern conditions, and I think that we seriously need to restructure the global economy and governments to reach the best world for the most people. Those who asked me to make a video on WhatIfAltHist told me that they are reactionary and part of a far-right pipeline, which is quite the accusation. They did indeed make a video on social justice warriors, which frankly shows that they are a historian and not a sociologist, because they do not seem to understand at all. The leftist part of the internet was properly outraged about the whole thing for a while, and Vosh even went into debate over it. Personally, I watched the video, but I don't think I have anything to add to it that others haven't said before. I always try to make videos that add something to the conversation. I don't think treading the same ground would help anyone learn anything. So instead I looked at WhatIfAltHist's most popular and most interesting sounding videos to see what stands out. And I have to admit, their videos are about 80% right. When I watched their What If Hitler Never Invaded Russia video, my only objection is that it was called the USSR back then and not Russia. Generally, most alt-hist stuff I watched was good videos, well researched and well thought out. It's just that the non-alt history videos they make have some common trends which I think tell us about the person who made these videos. First of all, they are 100% anti-communism. In their videos on 3 countries that could have been rich, they say that if it was not for those pesky Bolsheviks, Russia would be a superpower today. Which you can say the exact same thing about the protesters opposing the USSR in 91. If it was not for them, the USSR would be a superpower until today. So I think that's a bit of a weak argument. But they often talk about how the Soviet and Eastern Bloc economies were inefficient. This is a common capitalist critique. You see, in the USSR, it was more important to give everyone a job than to make every job be profitable. So yes, there were people doing useless jobs, which you can call inefficient if you like. But personally, I would prefer a slight inefficient economy if it means nobody is unemployed. This tells us a bit about WhatIfAltHist's ideology. It is clear that they did not do really any deep thinking about why the Soviet economy had this inefficiency. They're a historian in the West and read books by other historians in the West, none of whom thought about the advantages of a planned economy. They all make the same claim of inefficiency without considering advantages. WhatIfAltHist uses a capitalist framework, so all inefficiency is bad, which is true in a capitalist business that needs to compete to survive. But socialist businesses do not compete. They employ and pay people as their primary function. So I guess what we can say about WhatIfAltHist's ideology is that they're sucking up the default beliefs of their society. Capitalism is good because poverty declined, which is definitely causal and not just a correlation. And communism is bad because the USSR fell. They often call socialism a failed ideology because the USSR and the Eastern Bloc fell, which I find it interesting. Does an ideology failing a couple times really mean that it can never be tried again in a different form? That's definitely an interesting idea, because it would mean that liberal markets are a failed ideology. The first times free markets were established, it ended in massive economic collapse of the entire country. But capitalism supporters learned from it and made new forms of capitalism that are viable. The same thing as socialists do with the USSR. We see and will learn from its mistakes, so we can avoid them in the future. WhatIfAltHist says socialism has failed, but What they really should say is that Soviet socialism in this form has failed. Another notable thing is that they definitely think of themselves as politically being in the middle. They mention in multiple videos that the right and the left are both wrong because they just blame each other for issues instead of fixing them. Which I find hilarious because the entire point of political ideologies is to fix issues. So it is abundantly clear that WhatIfAltHist has no political education. They don't seem to understand political ideologies, so they say that they're in the middle. They don't understand the advantages of economic systems because they never considered anything besides neoliberal free market capitalism. They understand history, not politics or sociology. The funniest thing they said was in their video about China collapsing. They said China will collapse because it is like the French monarchy before the French Revolution. How did they make that connection? Well, you see, France was a feudal society, so there was a king and nobles that owned and controlled territory who answer to the king. And in China you have the president and executive committee, and below them are the governors that govern regions and answer to the president. I mean, if that doesn't prove that China will collapse to a liberal revolution soon, I don't know what does. WhatIfAltHist is also strangely obsessed with religions. They keep saying that areas with little faith, like East Germany and China, will develop their own new religions. I guess they assume people need faith to I don't know what. I think that they say that because in the past, when religions got weaker, new religions replaced those. So they assume the same thing will happen today as it did 2000 years ago. This is what I mean. They can see and explain historical trends, but have no understanding of current society. Frankly, people nowadays do not need religions. We have science and laws to live after. Religion is over, and I'm willing to bet everything that there will not be a new large-scale religion anywhere on Earth in the next 200 years. Shout out to those watching in 2020-22. They also imply that school shootings happen because young people have no guidance, which I disagree with because I have no religion to listen to and I did not murder anyone at the time of recording. Another thing is that WhatIfAltHist likes to predict things, like which countries will collapse. That is, South Africa and Indonesia, for example. And which ones will become regional superpowers, which is Iran, somehow. Why will South Africa and Indonesia collapse? Because there are many racial groups living there. Yes, they genuinely believe that different ethnicities cannot coexist in one country. This is what you call a red flag, because that's an assumption fascism makes. Also disproved by the fact that most African nations are dealing fine with many groups. Another assumption they make is that the US will stop trying to police the world. Why? Because they're self-sufficient in oil now. This appears in multiple videos, so they seem to think that America will just stop caring about ruling the world because of oil, which I find very optimistic. They're also obsessed with decline. They say that the World War will happen because we've not had a war in 70 years. Which only makes sense if your way to analyze the world is to look at historical trends. The complexity of advanced technology in the modern world is completely ignored, and this one trend that was right in the past is taken as proof. Again, they are a historian with limited knowledge of political reality. They also blame the left for a lot of things, and by the left, they mean actual leftist commies like me and social justice warriors as well as elites. Yes, they're one of those weirdos that assume that Biden is an honest-to-God leftist. He talks about the leftist elite multiple times and how social justice is an ideology that demands that people hate their own race. If you have been around, you know that this is a bigger red flag than the one that used to fly over the Kremlin. These are obvious fascist claims. Of course, this does not make WhatIfAltHist a fascist, but it means that they picked up some talking points. I don't think anyone will become a fascist from watching those videos alone, but this is where the concept of the pipeline comes back. The pipeline is the theory that some seemingly innocent YouTubers are sending people on a path to the far right. For example, WhatIfAltHist could talk about how dumb leftists and SJWs are, so people watch PragerU's videos on SJWs, and Ben Shapiro, then Lawrence Southern, and eventually full mask off ethno-nationalists or white identitarians, as fascists like to call themselves now, like Richard Spencer.
Hail Trump! Hail our people, hail victory!
The pipeline takes in normal people via things like alt history and leads them to radicalization, aka the alt-right. It's the same process that breeds radical Islamists. And of course there is a leftist pipeline as well, starting with philosophy tube, Bomberguy and ContraPoints, and moving on to Finnish Bolshevik, Bad and Pinata, and me, I guess. And I personally believe that my part in that pipeline is good. I teach people about alternative ways to see and change the world, which I think would be for the betterment of all mankind. So being part of a pipeline doesn't have to be bad, but if it is a far-right or Islamist pipeline, then yes, that is very bad. And I'm afraid WhatIfAltHist may, deliberately or not, promote far-right recruitment. The Western chauvinism is only one of the many things that point to that. The last thing I want to point out before we look at the topic from the video title is that they seem to have made this map here, which is arbitrary and splits the world into Chinese and American allies. Austria is an American ally for some reason, despite literally having it inscribed in a constitution that they will never join any military alliance or wars. The entire map is made up and it makes no sense. But they do use it many times, so they seem to think it's great. Let's finally come to the topic that resides in the title. That is known as the Great Man Theory, which basically is a way to look at history. Ever since the beginning of history, historians have been wondering what drives society, what causes wars and revolutions, democratic shift and crusades. There have been very many theories about this, and I will get into some in this section. In this case, it's Great Man Theory, in which historical events are said to be mainly driven by the desires and achievements of a few great leaders. Naturally, this way to look at history can easily oversimplify vastly complex issues. The advantage is that it is really easy to understand for people. If you read the Bible, it's basically only a story of great men, from Abraham to Jesus. But that doesn't mean that Great Man Theory is a good way to explain history. And it's definitely not a good way to predict anything. So how does WhatIfAltHist fit into this? Well, many of their videos have what I would call a tendency towards Great Man Theory. It's not the only theory they use. No modern historian would be that foolish, but just listen to this. In their video on what if the Soviets won the Cold War, they explain that to survive, the USSR would have had skilled leaders on the levels of Charlemagne and Franklin D. Roosevelt, and then actually says that if the USSR had better leaders, it would have made a more efficient economy and not collapsed. First of all, I agree that the late Soviet Union had a bad leadership, but I think the notion that good leaders would have made the economy more efficient does not understand the reason for that supposed inefficiency. As a matter of fact, Gorbachev introduced a profit drive into the economy to make it more efficient, and that is what led to the collapse of the USSR, among other things. In their video on countries that should have been rich, they say Singapore only became one of the richest areas in the world because of the actions of their great leader. Their placement on a huge global trade route seems not to matter. In the same one, he says that the Tsar of Russia was a great ruler, and if those pesky Soviets didn't interfere, Russia would have been a superpower by 1950. Instead, it became the Soviet Union, which was a superpower by 1948. Truly tragic. In 6 countries that will be superpowers by 2080, they say that there will be a great African superpower. Why? Because Africa has so many nations that it is very likely one leader will become a new Augustus or Charlemagne. That will supposedly unite many African nations. This again pretends that things like the formations of empires is down to single individuals and their abilities. Even worse, it completely ignores the fact that the world is not like 500 years ago. Wars of conquest are almost exclusive to the past. The international community does not allow such things to happen anymore. In the same video, he says that Turkey could conquer the entire Middle East and the Balkans if it was not for current-day leadership, which is bad and going into debt. In What If Teddy Roosevelt won in 1912, they changed the entire world history from that point on, without even considering that maybe the hostile Congress would have blocked all of Roosevelt's ideas. Yes, Roosevelt would 100% have been a better leader than Wilson, especially in foreign matters where the president is all powerful, but this is part of a trend. In The Fall of China, they explain everything wrong with China and blame it all on Xi Jinping. This is where they compare China to France before the revolution. And in the video on what if Hitler never invaded Russia, they just say that the only thing that needs to change is that Hitler changes ambition. Not a word about how the generals and leaders of Nazi Germany wanted to destroy the so-called Jewish Bolshevism and obtain Lebensraum. The fact that most of Nazi Germany wanted an invasion and that it was a core part of the propaganda is ignored, and they assume that if Hitler decides against it, it won't happen. As you can tell, WhatIfAltHist definitely has a tendency to attribute things that were caused by whole societies, movements, or classes to single leaders. Of course, the leaders are always just mentioned as part of what is needed for greatness, but it is notable how often they need to bring up Charlemagne in comparison to hypothetical rulers. Ultimately, great man theory is not used by many people at all. It's an inaccurate oversimplification of the truth, and I hope I don't have to spend too long on explaining why. But if great man theory is more wrong than right, then what drives society? Why do the things that happen? Well, there are many other theories out there. There is the complete opposite of great man theory, and that's called history from below, or people's history, in which instead of assuming that leaders drive history, we look at the common people and how the masses influence the future of a group. Most people who look at history this way are politically leftists. For example, if you look at history using critical race theory, you will look at the history and oppression of people of color. Though critical race theory itself is confined to the United States in the last 300-ish years. I have a video on it if you're interested. There are, of course, non-leftist ways to look at history and classify it. For example, a far-right way to analyze history would also talk about racial groups. In this framework, people mainly look at the conflict between designated racial groups. The most common example is fascism, which explains history as a grand conflict between the superior Aryan people and the inferior Jewish people who somehow keep coming out on top. As you can tell, some frameworks are not based on reality and are dangerous to use. Because if you think of history as a race conflict, you may do something really stupid like genocide. While pretty much everyone agrees that National Socialism was wrong to blame the Jews, and that their talking points were mostly pulled from thin air, the common person, especially the ones with a tendency to the right, still use racialized frameworks. May I remind you that WhatIfAltHist literally says South Africa and Indonesia will collapse because they have too many different racial groups. This is a light form of a racial analysis, but it stems from the same assumption as fascist thought, mainly that designated racial groups are in conflict and cannot peacefully coexist. This is why some people told me that WhatIfAltHist is a reactionary. They use the same assumptions. They literally say that the US will defend Europe, but only as long as it is a majority white nation. If the demographics change, for some reason American imperialism would end. There's also a framework of religious conflict, in which you look at different religions and sects and their conflict to explain history. For example, the Crusades can be explained as a religious conflict very easily, and so can be the spread of Islam. If we return to the idea of a people's history, we find my favorite framework, historical materialism. Basically, the theory says that the most important conflict in the world and history is the one between those who work for a living and those who own property for a living. Working class against capitalist class. The video is getting long already, so I can't elaborate, but I genuinely think that this framework is best in most cases. I will link it now and in the end screen for you. Ultimately, these frameworks are all incomplete. If you look at great man theory, maybe you can explain the Napoleonic Wars, but not the French or the October Revolution. If you only look at people's history, then how will you explain the Crusades? And if you only look at religious frameworks, how will you explain the Norman conquest of England? Any serious historian must use different frameworks for different things. It depends on what you're looking at. Using one framework and ignoring all others is just going to lead you to wrong conclusions. History and society are complicated, so analyzing them is complicated. This is the last section with the things I was not able to fit anywhere else, but I also wanted to talk about. First of all, look at my fancy thumbnail. This image here which WhatIfAltHist uses as their profile picture, seems to not exist on the internet with more than 500 by 500 pixels. But it's the wrong format. So I used my education in graphics design, yes I have that, though I never finished it, to elongate it. Don't look at the details, it didn't do a perfect job. Something interesting is, and I can't for the life of me figure out in what video this was, but it was a recent one, and WhatIfAltHist was kind of like bragging that he made 2 correct predictions about the future a few months back. One, that there would be an economic crisis in the 2020s, which is pretty much a surefire bet in capitalism, and the other was that Russia would not be able to conquer Ukraine. It's amazing how they were able to predict this. But the best part is, in their video on World War III, they show Russia conquering half of Eastern Europe in the early stages of the war. They predicted both Russia conquering Ukraine and Russia failing to conquer Ukraine. And now they say that they predicted it. I mean, if you predict all options, of course you will be right. So to come to the conclusion, the main form of predicting the future, which WhatIfAltHist uses, is historical trends. This image shows there were major wars every 100 years or so World War III must be around the corner. Capitalism has reduced poverty so far, so that will definitely continue until everyone is a millionaire. The issue with that is that you completely ignore the differences between current and past societies. You're just relying on maybe 4 historical trends to try to explain an overly complicated current-day political situation. This is the danger if you let historians describe the present and future. They will look at some trends and extrapolate them out and assume that this will work. If you had someone like a sociologist or a political science major, they would do a much better job because their education is made to describe and predict current reality. Historians are educated to look at history, not the present. So I think historians like WhatIfAltHist should stay out of the current day politics. Ultimately, on their channel, WhatIfAltHist promotes rightist ideas. From a racialized view on national politics to assuming that people need religions for some godforsaken reason. They seem to want to be a centrist and echo far-right ideas in the process. Maybe they're a centrist who is very oblivious to the danger their arguments cause. Their complete lack of understanding of what social justice is and their continued insistence that social justice is somehow national policy in the West just promotes further far-right ideas. Not to mention their super shallow analysis of things like socialism. The great man theory thing is not great because it could lead people to assume that we need a strong leader, like in fascism. Is WhatIfAltHist deliberately promoting these rightist things? I have no idea, I can't look into their brain. I can just say that in praxis, that's what they end up doing. Thank you all very much for watching. I could do many more detailed and focused videos on WhatIfAltHist if you're interested, or I could go back on the regularly scheduled programming and explain how some national leaders, again, think that nuclear war can be won and how it endangers the whole world. That was the other video I did this week, but people voted against it. Don't worry, I will do it eventually anyways, it's just a matter of time. Anyways, thank you very much for watching. Make sure to support me by hitting like, sharing and subscribing. And if you are willing, you can even donate on Patreon or with the super thanks button I set up now. Yes, I'm setting up more monetization option, which is a subtle way of telling you that I need more money. My spending increased a lot now that I pay for rent and taxes. And even worse, while recording this audio, I got a bill from a hospital. Suicide attempts are a very bad financial decision, I tell you. My point is I think I need a real job at some point. Anyways, if you decide to donate €5, you get to join my Discord. And if you donate 10, I will read out your name like this. Special thanks to Autumn Keasley, Theon Hartley, Alan Bow, Eric Betts, V, Xander Corbett, Tusnik, Attila Nemetz, Carissa, Daniel Hyman, Dominic Cusanelli, Emily Marigold Klassen, Evie Wren, Herdina, Ian Snyder, Kevin Sanders, Klastrup, Lazy Panda 234, Liam S, Nane Pemmer, Raman DeVille, Red Shock Trooper, Sarah, Sean Murphy, Stairmaster Chef and Theon Gillian Jr.